You also will not want to miss this first panel on quantum communications. I have an illustrious team of experts, Karl Holmqivst, close enough, right, from Lastwall is going to moderate this discussion. Karl is the CEO of Lastwall Networks, located in Vancouver, Canada, and Mountain View, California. Lastwall is building new internet security systems broadly based on new ways of authenticating users and strongly enforcing identity. Their initial focus areas include strong identity and end-user authentication for cloud. Karl, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mimi. And that's a short-form way of saying I'm a security nerd. So, in our conversation today, we're going to talk about quantum communications. To frame this, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We're going to talk about what's currently being done with quantum effects in communications, how some of these new innovations with quantum technologies can impact our everyday security. And then we're going to talk about how some of these new communications technologies can help us be resilient to new and emerging threats, followed by sort of looking at what does the future hold for communications in a quantum-enabled environment. So, as mentioned, I'm Karl. I'm joined here by Bruno, who's a physicist, and Chris, who's an engineer. They both have deep backgrounds in the physics and in the engineering of things like fiber optic networks and quantum key distribution. So to frame our conversation today, we'll sort of kick off, and I'll say that in my world, what we try to do is we try to protect against problematic events. And let's just say communications events or security and internet events. We need good cryptography. At the base of really good cryptography, no matter what we use, is really strong entropy sources. And so just trying to gauge what our level of technical understanding here is, if I say dual EC, does anyone know what that is? Show of hands. Okay, so we're not in a room full of cryptographers, so if we go too deep into technical detail, jump ahead and we'll sort of try to not use the acronyms and not be as technical. But to start off, I think I'd ask our two panelists to introduce themselves and give you just a bit of background on what they do. And then we're going to ask the question, so if we need strong entropy, what are some of these new technology pieces that are quantum enabled? And Bruno's going to give us a bit of an overview. But before we kick in there, maybe just a little bit of background, please.
Okay, so I'm Bruno Huttner. I'm working with ID Quantique. And ID Quantique is well known for both randomness generation, for quantum randomness generation. We have quantum random number generators, and also for QKD. We were the first one to offer a commercial QKD system, and we've been working on that for many years. I think we are in our fourth generation of QKD systems. And recently we have started to work, we are starting to work with Nokia to integrate QKD into real network, and that's probably a good way to start with.
And they told us to not stand in front of the speaker, so that's why I'm going to move over here, but not block these guys. Anyway, my name's Chris Janson, and yeah, I appreciate the introduction, Karl. We were chatting this morning, and I was thinking, these guys are really smart back here. I'm not a physicist, and I'm not a cryptographer, but I do play one during the week, or I try to play that way. I've spent most of my career, some 30-odd years, working in networking companies. So Nokia. By the way, some people almost instinctively, if I'm going somewhere in an airplane or whatever, and I have a Nokia logo on, anyone says, oh yeah, that phone company, they still exist? That's always the US perception. You go to Europe and they understand that Nokia is a much larger company, and we've acquired sort of the remnants, if you will, of AT&T Network Systems, Lucent Technologies, Alcatel-Lucent. I'm not saying that as a commercial. I'm just trying to help you understand where I'm coming from and the reason I'm here even. So we build networks, or maybe I more accurately should say we make equipment that those people building networks use. So our interest in this topic is, our customers need to keep their networks secure and safe. And so this whole prospect or principle of, or threat of quantum computers used in a bad way is we think should be of top of mind for our customers, and it's becoming very quickly more top of mind for our customers. So give it back to Karl.
Great. Well, so I think to jump in and getting back to that foundation of cryptography and random numbers and entropy, Something that was really neat we were discussing this morning, and I've actually got a picture of one of the chips, is IDQ have developed a quantum random number generator. And so, to start that off, if the fundamental basis of good cryptography to deploy in practical systems that are needed for defense is good entropy, I'm really interested as to what one of these small little chips actually does and how it works, because this is an exploitation of a quantum effect to help us improve everyday security, not just quantum things. So, Bruno, could you tell us a little bit about how this works and what's going on here?
Of course. So really, cryptography is based on randomness. I mean, every time you try to do some something cryptographic, you need good randomness to start with. And also, Albert Einstein was not very happy with that. Quantum is probably the best way to get randomness. I mean, when you make a measurement of a quantum system, you basically create randomness. There is no way when you make a measurement, you know which way it will go. The measurement can go one way or another, and it's absolutely impossible to know in advance what it will give you. And Einstein said God does not play dice, but on this one, unfortunately for us, maybe he was wrong, which means that we now know, and it has been proved over and over again, that quantum mechanics is basically non-deterministic. We use that here with our very small chip. Basically, we measure light, and the amount of current we get from this light depends on quantum effects. And we extract the quantum effect from all the classical ones. We make sure that there is no classical noise left in the system, and that we extract only the quantum-based noise. And from that, we get entropy. And this entropy can be used everywhere. We use this small chip, for example, in mobile phones, and we also use it for computers, for hardware security modules. Every time you need something cryptographic, quantum can help you. Okay? And I think it's interesting because we were discussing, I mean, if you have been to other talks, the quantum advantage of a quantum computer. Is it today or not? We know that today there is already a quantum advantage if you want to generate entropy. Classically, again, maybe it's something which I need to push a little bit. Classically, you cannot generate entropy easily because classical mechanics is deterministic. So quantum is really a good way to do that. And that's what we're trying to do. And the good thing now is that it's so small that you could really integrate it anywhere. And I've already discussed with Karl how we will work together so that we will give him a few of our random number generators.
Yeah, so my perspective on this is I'm looking at the practical side, and I'm saying, wow, we're looking at how to build quantum resilient systems. And some of that is deploying, instead of classical cryptography, it's deploying post-quantum algorithms, which are usually based on things like matrices and lattices. The interesting thing about that is you actually need a more sort of complete entropy source, or you need more entropy in total to make some of those, or to generate some of those systems. So without trying to get into the technical details, which is sometimes tough for me, I would just say that this idea of being able to locally source and generate your own entropy at a high rate, this is something that's important if I think about things like ID cards that might be post-quantum resilient, or if in situations where on a mobile device I wanted to be able to have sufficient entropy to create new keys. So again, key foundations are dependent on entropy. And this is, again, a wonderful opening example of a quantum effect that can be exploited now and can be deployed now in all sorts of applications. So that's sort of our first opening area. I think we're going to move from there as one example of how to use a quantum effect to talking about quantum key distribution, because I remember hearing about the quantum internet and communications that would be quantum, and thinking, wow, how does that actually work? And one of the things that we need in security is when we have these nice strong keys that have good entropy sources, we need to exchange them. If Ben is over there and I want to have a private communication with him, we need to be able to encrypt the data we're sending to each other with our keys. If you send that key over the wire, and that's not a resilient system, somebody can intercept that key, and there's a problem called harvest now or store now, decrypt later, where somebody can capture that encrypted data and can decrypt that later. There are technologies like quantum key distribution, which happens over a fiber line. And I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding. So maybe we can just sort of open again with Bruno and say, how does QKD work? What is, maybe at a high level for those who aren't familiar, what is QKD? How does it work? And what's going on?
So, I mean, you could see that maybe as some quantum magic. Basically, two people would like to communicate, and it's not that they send one key to another. What they do is they work together, and at the end of the process, they share a secret key between the two of them. And we can prove that this key is the same and that this key is also secret. Okay? You can do that with entanglement. That's probably the easiest way to understand it. But we do it with so-called prepare and measure. So Alice prepares, send to Bob. And then there is a lot of processing between them in order to generate this secure key. What's really important is we have a proof. We know when this key is good and when it isn't. And if you come to our booth, we have a booth upstairs. If you come to our booth, you will actually see that in action. There is a quantum key distribution system working. So you can really, and I can discuss the detail. I don't think we want to go too technical. That's what you said. So we will probably stop here. But it's really the idea that two people on both sides of a link, which can be hundreds of kilometers nowadays, can share a secret key without any assumption about mathematics, quantum computer or so. It's really based on quantum mechanics.
And so one of the things that I asked about in my previous life, I was involved in telecommunications, and I said, wow, this is great. I would like to start using quantum key distribution. Can I, where and how can I use that? And one of the questions that I asked was, can I use that in, say, cloud-based environments? It turns out that at this point, there are some limitations, and there's some very specific, great use cases, like point-to-point communications, but where would you say the most utility for quantum key distributions are right now, or systems are now?
Well, there was a data center discussion yesterday, and I think maybe that's the most important use today. The simplest use case today is really if you got two data centers and there is a lot of information, you need a lot of encryption between these two. Today, we can already protect that perfectly with QKD. So that's really one point to one point, one data center to another. Today, you got perfect security for that. Probably the most important point to remember is that QKD provides long-term confidentiality. It means that if you do QKD today, it doesn't matter if there is a quantum computer or not in the future, your key is as secure today as tomorrow, as in 10 years. Of course, the way you use this key may be different now and in 10 years, but at least the basic is right. Now, that's one thing, but of course, it's not enough, and we need to go further, and that's the idea of QKD networks on how to use the keys to extend the range by putting these keys into different network modes, and that's really what our colleague here in Nokia will do.
Yeah, so, just to clarify this, unfortunately, when I was first discussing this a few years ago, I was sort of thinking, hey, at some point, my fiber to my home connection is going to have quantum keys and a QKD system. Nope, turns out the domain at this point of QKD is down low in networks. And from a practical security standpoint, if I'm trying to think of how to build resilient systems, I ask the question, what can I do? And one of the concepts we use in cybersecurity is defense in depth. And that means that you don't count on one silver bullet or one technological piece. You look at many, many layers. And one of the interesting things, I think, is down low, in a telecommunications network where you have things like backbone fiber communications. Right now, what we're seeing is there are adversaries who are bulk collecting encrypted data. And one of the questions that I was sort of chatting with these gentlemen about, and I'm hoping Chris will jump in here on, is if we have those low-level fiber optic OSI model layer 1, for those who are tracking, sort of systems, what can we actually do today to secure those networks from potential threats of classical cryptography class breaks?
Right. Is this too close to the speaker? I'm good. All right, I'm good. Well, it's interesting because, Bruno's talking about quantum key distribution and certainly available now. But I have to tell a very quick, I won't keep it too long, story about the sort of evolution of encrypting the lower layers of the OSA stack. I'm tempted to go over there and draw it on the whiteboard, but I won't. But I hope enough of you are familiar with this idea of the reference model and networking, where at the very base layer we have our physical connections, the physical optical connections that might go between, a government building in downtown DC and a data center out here in suburban Virginia. And, you know, initially fiber optic networks were built to carry that traffic, and frankly, security might have been a bit of an afterthought, right? That layer, that bottom layer was thought, it's on optical fiber, close enough. Maybe we'll do something up at the application layer, you know, TLS, SSL, these different technologies, and that's good enough. And it probably was, you know, at one point. Now, over time, say the past 10 years or so, you know, in our world of building optical networks, the idea of encryption, just simply using AES 256, you know, 256-bit key lengths, and distributing them by usually an asymmetric method was, again, good enough, check the box, we move on. And frankly, that was, I think, a good approach for a long time. But we live in a rapidly changing world. I think if you're at this conference, you're getting a sense of that, or you know that already. And you know, if I go back about 5 years ago or so, a number of folks within Nokia, a very small group of us, you know, kind of recognized that this was a problem, and we started to develop a solution based on classical physics random number generation and centralized symmetric key distribution. So we still have this optical link, maybe between DC and McLean here or something, still using AES 256. However, we use a centralized key distribution and out-of-band distribution method to get that pre-shared key to both ends of the links. And, you know, that gives us a very robust, you know, we'll say quantum safe, maybe for now, a solution. Now, is that enough? Well, no, because look, the environment continues to change, and people have different preferences. We learn around the world. And so the technology that Bruno has, that his company brings in, this idea of QKD, quantum key distribution, takes it to another level, right? You know, and so what we are working on is a system that integrates these two technologies together. So what we're, you know, putting out there to the industry is that, you know, you can deploy something right now. You may already have AES 256 encrypted optical links in a network, and we can evolve that over time to include QKD, to include the post-quantum cipher, PQC, post-quantum cryptography up at the application layer. These things all can fit together. So, I mean, if I have one last message for you all, I hope it's that, you know, don't look for a single silver bullet. It's not just encryption at layer one. It's not just PQC either. So there's a lot of work to be done here, and I think the tools are all out there. So.
Well, thanks, Chris. And I think it's, you know, your point about in defense, we need many layers, and, you know, the optical layer down in the transport of our networks or between data centers, all the way up to deploying, you know, things like hybrid classical post-quantum wraps on your, you know, natively in your browser on your actual internet traffic. We need to do not just one of these things, we need to do all of these things, because there is a level of increase in threat. So I think with that's sort of our overview of what's going on in the landscape of quantum communications. We've got a few minutes, so what we were hoping to do is open this up and ask for questions. So, you know, at this point, interested audience members, please ask.
Hi.
We're wired. You might have to shout.
Okay, so we have a small. About the random number generators. Currently, do we have standards on those, or are all proprietary technologies from different vendors?
So there is a lot of work in standardization, actually, in all these fields. I mean, you know, PQC, there is a lot of work. QKD, there is a lot of work. On QRNG as well, there is a lot of work. Today, there is no standard specifically for quantum. If you have a random number generator, a physical random number generator, there is a standard, there is a way to make sure that your system follows the rules. And actually, our system was certified by NIST on this entropy source validation program. So there is something which exists today. It's done in the US. And NIST now requires that any system which wants to be FIPS certified should have an entropy source inside. And this entropy source, our systems follow this, but other systems can do it classically. But there is nothing quantum at the moment in certification. But there is a lot of work in ITU and in ETSI, the European Telecommunication Standard Institute, in this direction. So I believe within a few years, there will be probably standardization all around. And I think it's really important because as a user, you probably don't want to say, oh, I want this guy or this guy or this guy. How can I choose? Well, the first thing is you look at who is following the rules, basically, who is following the standardization, who can be certified. And I think that's the first step for you to be able to use it in an easier way.
I think from my perspective, there's a slightly different view. I don't care where the entropy comes from. If that's from cosmic radiation or from a quantum effect, doesn't matter to my systems when I'm generating keys. What matters is cost and power consumption and the practical elements of engineering. So when you have something that's small and easy to deploy into hardware that can give you good randomness, that allows you to have endpoint distributed entropy as opposed to having to rely on a centralized source.
But it's very important that this source is certified by somebody. In your case,
absolutely.
you don't need
I want
because
it
you probably
validated.
can check it. But if it's already validated, that's the point of all this certification stuff. I mean, you take something which is already validated and you don't have to spend your time trying to check all the, I mean, you could take our random number generator and go through all the NIST, test to check how good is the entropy and so on. But it's rather time consuming. Whereas if you look at the paperwork and you see this one is validated, it's good. You will probably do a few tests anyway, but you know that it's in the right direction already.
Yeah, and for manufacturers like Chris and at the low level in a network, you want to know that those systems are validated. And as somebody who works with government agencies and regulated industry, I have to tell them, yeah, this is certified. So having that certification program is really important, and it's amazing to have new technological pieces that can be used. We have 5 minutes left, and I'm sure there were probably more questions.
To follow up, my understanding is that there are some quasi quantum random number generators, and some are real based on real quantum mechanics. So my question is, what are you using and what are your thoughts, and can this quasi be certified too?
I mean, again, as I said, today there is no certification which is specifically quantum. So if you have a random number generator which you want to certify, you have to go to the certification body and explain how is the entropy created. And if they are happy that this is a good way, they can certify it. They will not put quantum or not quantum. They will just say, yes, it's good enough. Okay? So I have not really heard about quasi-quantum, QQ, that's interesting. So what I can tell you is that our system is quantum. I mean, it has been actually validated completely by the NIST. But that's it. I mean, I don't know about any other quasi-quantum random number generator.
Not quasi-quantum, quasi.
Okay. So you got other random number generator based on physical processes which are classical. Okay. Pseudo is no good. Pseudo random number generator, you need to have a random seed to start with. Where do you get the random seed? From a random number generator. So it's a step, but it's not good enough. For random number generator based on classical physics, the main contender, if you want, is a chaotic source. So you got something chaotic, and then, of course, what goes out is random. Now, when you got a chaotic process, there is still a link between what you get at time t and what you get at time t plus 1. The link is complicated, and it's hard to follow. But we believe that today, with the new, for example, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on, you could actually follow what's going on with this chaotic process and know that it's not truly random. Okay? The good point about quantum is that what you measure at time t plus 1 is totally independent of what you measure at time t. It's one measurement, another measurement. One quantum system, a similar quantum system, but low link between them. So I think it's better. But again, what we really need is to make sure that the system is certified at some stage you can put in your systems.
Yeah, formal verification is really important there. Question in the back. Oh, and then after here.
As far as I understand, QRNG and QPD don't provide a means of authentication. So what is your approach in authentication in a network? And how will you weigh the importance of authentication and key exchange in the era of quantum computing?
I think they're all for me, but so you are right and not so right. Authentication is an issue for QKD. For a quantum random number generator, you just generate entropy. And this entropy will be actually used for classical authentication system. You can use it with classical cryptography, for post-quantum cryptography. Every time you want to do cryptography, if you use a quantum random number generator, you're sure you have good entropy. Now, the second aspect of your question about QKD, you're right. You need authentication of the users before you can really do QKD. QKD is about confidentiality. So you need some kind of classical way to authenticate the users. For example, for point-to-point, we use an initial shared key, a pre-shared key between the two users. But then QKD will renew it every time. So you just have, initially, you exchange a first key, and then the QKD will provide it to you so you can make sure that you are still authenticated well. You can also use post-quantum. I mean, some post-quantum algorithms are very solid. I'm thinking especially in all the hash-based functions, which are really, today they're understood as being really, really safe, and you could use that in your system. I think once you have a big, very large network, you will need that because it's not so practical to authenticate every guy in the system with initially shared keys. Or maybe you can have this big centralized key management system which could actually give these pre-shared keys first to people. Again, to make it short, confidentiality, QKD is for confidentiality. You need authentication. You need to find another way. Yeah.
There's a follow-up question here in front.
Yeah, I had a question. So I understand a lot of these random bit sources do diagnostics or health checks when they first boot up. But in terms of like physical tampering by an adversary, do you have any safeguards or integrity testing to detect that that's happening?
Yes, we do have. There is an integrity, there is a test in the system. Basically, on our side, what's important is the level of power which is received at the detector. As long as this power is high enough, not too high and not too low, we know that we are measuring quantum effects. And then we know that the system is working. So before you get anything, every time you boot up, the system will check, and the system will also measure the average power to make sure it's working. Now, of course, anti-tampering is something else at some stage. If people start to go inside and check, but then we're going back to FIPS certification. Really, you put your module in a crypto system, and then this environment will provide you the security.
I think from a practical practitioner standpoint too, we have a saying in security, which is physical access is root access. And if you have access to a physical system, you can always find interesting ways of tampering with it. When I look at things like a good randomness source, and I think of building, for example, HSMs, which are hardware security modules to keep your keys, there are probably more considerations in the physical supply chain side, where those things are made, who they're made by, how they're validated, how they get to your site or to your initial manufacturing source, and then how they get into your data centers. Those elements probably become more important than the actual validation on boot, because the difficulty of tampering with those systems is, well, it's possible, but you have to be really, really good. And you do see component swaps, and you do see elements like that inside production systems, but those are generally supply chain issues, not chip issues. If you have a manufacturer who has been validated and is known, does that help?
I'm gonna cut this short, but hopefully Karl and Bruno and Chris will be available later on for any follow-up questions. But thank you all very much for coming.